Ben Emlyn Jones is a popular researcher, writer and blogger within the truth community, and is a former hospital porter and founder of Hapanwo, Hospital Porters Against a New World Order. Ben has written several books and runs the Hapanwo sites, including Hapanwo Voice, Hapanwo TV and Hapanwo Radio. And Unite Planet travelled to his home city of Oxford to meet with him and discuss many areas of his research, including UFOs, the UFO disclosure, Roswell, the Apollo missions and the global elite. So stay tuned to the special Unite Planet programme with Ben Emlyn Jones.
Well, hospital porters' pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV.
Thank you very much, Ben, for allowing us in. It's your brother's house,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. And for accepting us to come along and interview you today. So we'd just like to start with how you got involved, a bit of background on yourself. I know you used to be a hospital porter, didn't you?
I was, yes.
And a bit of background on yourself and how you got into UFOs and the New World Order and all this, the alternative knowledge stuff.
It was quite a long story. There's no one moment, you know, you hear the phrases such as waking up or being red pilled and things like that. And that never happened to me. It's not just one moment, I could say, where that happened. I recall from being quite young and having an interest in paranormal things, in ghosts and UFOs and things like that. I did have a UFO book when I was a child, and I remember reading it quite with great interest. I managed to pick up another copy of it too. It's quite good. But I did have a couple of experiences as a young child, which included when I was very young, when I think I was about 5 years old. I encountered sort of a dark entity with a very loud voice, or very loud, made a lot of very loud noise in my house, and my family, I believe, that used to talk about some parts of the house being haunted, and so that led me, I suppose, to question what many people consider reality, the normal things to do with reality, and I think this grew as time went on. It grew, and I became more. I suppose because I had several ghostly encounters and things like that, and then I also started to wonder about. I took an interest in politics, and I wondered how much deceit there is in politics, how much deception there is. I started reading books on. I read a book about space and space exploration, concerning various secrets revolved with that, about the cover-up of UFOs by NASA, the faking of the moon landings and things like that, and several other missions which were questionable, not just by NASA but by the Russians during the space race, things like that. And this led me to down the path where I started looking for more information about this. I read David Icke. Now he was very, very influential on me. David Icke. I read every book I could get of his. I started reading him when he just brought out The Biggest Secret, which is I think his most famous book. But I read all of his. I managed to get hold of all of the ones he'd written before. Literally every single one, because he'd written about 8 before that.
Right, okay.
So I literally read every single one. And he was very influential on me, because he talked about the New World Order. He talked about how what people call conspiracy theories are actually reality. There's evidence for them, and it goes very, very deep. And there's a massive amount of what you would call conspiracy theories in at large in the world that are going on in the world of all kinds, and that had an enormous effect on me.
Right.
And then in 2001, September 2001, September the 11th, 9/11 happened.
Of course, yeah.
Now that was, I think boosted a lot of people's interest in these subjects. I was, definitely you yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, Paul, but I mean, I was like, I watched it in shock and horror, and I didn't question it straight away. I didn't.
No, I didn't.
I think this is where the skeptics maybe misjudge us. They say, "Oh, you just like make these things up spontaneously, and it's all nonsense." And because they said there's no reason behind it. In fact, my ideas about 9/11 came after a very long period of reflection and investigation and study.
Yeah, it wasn't just a 1 second moment, and then
exactly.
it takes time, doesn't it?
David Icke himself has researched it quite early on, didn't he, as well? Very well, I thought.
Definitely.
There was several of the early researchers. There's people like Thierry Meysson, and there was the guy who wrote the New Pearl Harbor. What's his name? I can't remember.
No, I can't remember.
But he was very Griffin, David Ray Griffin.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And he was those. I looked into what they were doing, and I was getting online. I was on the internet by then. And it suddenly struck me, of course, then that's where the idea of false flag terrorism came into it. The idea that the deception in warfare and conflict, and it's quite surprised me. Firstly, 9/11 is not the only one example of this. Not the only example. It's not by far, not the first.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
It's a major one, but it's a very, very. It's probably the biggest, but it's not the only example.
No,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah.
It goes back a hell of a long way. This idea of that you would, to start a war. This is what the governments do. They have to start it through deception very often. You can't just persuade people openly to fight in a war. You have to convince them they're under attack. You have to, and if necessary, stage an attack.
Yeah.
You attack your own side first, make it look like the enemy did it, and that will motivate the people. It'll make and this is actually an very, very old strategy that's been done. It's a tactic that dates back centuries, and there are examples dating back centuries. I mean, the earliest I came across is probably the Great Fire of Rome, which happened about 2,000 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And you may have heard the phrase "Nero fiddled while Rome burned."
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And of course, the Emperor Nero, he blamed the Great Fire on his political opponents. He said it was done by them, or in fact, it looks like he did it himself,
Right.
in order to gain political advantages over them, or political advantage over them. And this is why he wasn't shot. This is why he just fiddled, as they said, played on a musical instrument while it was all going on. But that, see, I did, like I said, I didn't. 9/11 sort of came. It slowly came to that realization, and then of course the 9/11 truth saga moved on and on and on. And you've talked to Andrew Johnson about this, and then Dr. Julie Wood got involved. And I started studying her work, and again, I was kind of on the fence with it for a while, but then it soon became clear that she had actually worked it out. Exactly what she had worked out.
And
what
I've
happened.
got the book. I'm reading it. It does become clear that she's the only one that's of what happened to the towers has got an explanation, and it's backed with scientific evidence. It's there, isn't it?
The book's quite. I did read the book, and I've listened to a lot of her lectures. It was pretty definitive, and at that time, of course, that's when you got the different factions within the 9/11 Truth movement, because there were people saying, no, it was done by thermite. And I mean, I looked into this. I mean, I was with David Icke had mentioned some of these things, and you had people. There were several people in, because there was a group here in Oxford about, I think it was about 3 years after 9/11, there was like a week of activity. It was the 9/11 3-year anniversary thing. There was a group of people here in Oxford that I got involved with, and that's when I've learned about that they'd found thermite in the residue from 9/11, and it was thermite that used thermite charges to bring these things down. So it was like a conventional demolition. And I thought that made sense. It did. It made sense.
It did for me for a while.
Yeah. But then, of course, as Andrew's pointed out, it's Dr. Judy Wood has questions. She has demolished. She's debunked that, and that to me makes perfect sense as well, because there's all kinds of problems with the thermite idea.
Yeah.
I mean, the practicalities of it all, and the fact there was so little actual solid rubble.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
there's very little solid rubble. Like most of it just turned to dust. And then, of course, I thought to myself, well, maybe the intention is, and Andrew's talked about this in great detail, maybe the intention then is so that people will come into the 9/11 Truth Movement, they'll question the official story, they'll come across this thermite idea, they'll realise it's nonsense, they'll read the sceptical articles on it saying it's nonsense, and, well, that will make them think, well, maybe the official story was true after all.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the idea.
Yeah. It's like the thermite theory and the controlled demolition, it'll always lead you to a dead end.
Yes.
And it's purposely done like that. You know?
That's the
Yeah,
intention.
Yeah.
And that happens an awful lot. I mean, so
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
getting involved in the world of conspiracy, of course, the conspiracy is often deeper than you might think. And it's, even within the conspiracy theory world, there's deceit,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and there are forces that will mislead us.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. That's it, yeah. Yeah, we found that. I mean, things like we described it in the call over here, like the flat Earth theories and things like that. Things that are not relevant, but people are going crazy. Flat Earthers and not flat Earthers, and you know, they just to divide people again, isn't it? You know,
That's what's bad.
I mean, the flat Earth thing actually baffles me.
It really does. I mean, I remember it can be traced very, very precisely. It's quite recent, this flat Earth mania that suddenly emerged. It can be traced to the end of 2014 because a book was published by someone called Eric Dubay, which basically lays out the entire theory is laid out in this book, and I've read it, and I actually people were asking me to comment on it because I wasn't really going to cover it in detail. I know Andrew won't have anything to do with it, and I understand why. But people saying, "Oh, Ben, you've got to say something about this." So I did a radio show about it, and I interviewed Mark Sargent, who's one of the biggest flatheads. You know.
Okay. Flatheads.
A flathead, yeah. And I did that, and I did another interview with a guy called Niall Murphy, who's again trying to detract from all this. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm a globalist, as they call us.
Yeah.
And I never ever thought that the flat Earth theory had any validity at all. It was fairly transparent, but the people who believe in it are very, very doctrinaire. And when I was actually doing this radio show, they were posting in the live chat box, and there was all kinds of getting quite angry.
Yeah.
You know, supporting Mark Sargent, and I was quite surprised. And to this day on Facebook, you know, I'll get talking to people about this, and they will get quite virulent and saying, you know, that I have to believe in this is true because all the evidence is there that it's true. And I'm like, well, no. I mean, it's not, and I can explain why. And it's pretty. I mean, it's a pretty ridiculous idea, actually. That basically the Earth is just a flat plate, and there's this firmament, or whatever they call this dome, what, 1 million miles high above the Earth, and I question, well, what's outside it? What's below us then?
Yeah.
If we were in this dome, in this hemisphere, and they said, oh, we don't know.
Yeah, that's it.
Everything out there in the universe is fake. I mean, because I've gone into discussions with flatheads when I was talking about their moon landings, because they accept them. And I said, yeah, of course I do think the moon landings were fake. That's what got me into this whole. But then, but they weren't fake because the Earth's flat.
Of course, yeah.
They weren't.
It makes sense. Yeah.
They were fake for another matter. But now, whether this has been done deliberately, I mean, whether it's been done deliberately as a psychological operation to maybe gauge people's reaction and see exactly who will believe it, who won't, and how many people believe it. That's a possibility. But even if it's not, even if it wasn't created for that purpose, Eric Dubay just seems to be this guy who just writes books and things like that. And he writes a lot on anarchist politics and things like that. He writes on several different subjects. He doesn't seem to be some kind of psyop. He's not got a history of being a psychological operative. Regardless of that, I mean, he may just have hit the right note accidentally, which they want to then amplify. The people who are psychological operatives. I think a lot of disinformation is actually just generated by accident.
I think that.
Or inadvertently. And then it becomes, it's in a sense, its path to fame and distribution is beaten for it by the people who are psychological operatives. Another good example is the alien autopsy. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It's incredible. This film came to life. It shows these two guys cutting up this dead alien, and I've got to know some of the people who are actually involved in it and actually creating the hoax.
Right.
And of course, it was a hoax. I mean, and very, very few people thought otherwise from the very start, despite what a lot of the claims you get from the skeptics. Oh, they had ufology fooled for 25 years and things like that. No, they didn't. They had a few people fooled.
Yeah.
But the actual organiser of the hoax is a man called Spiros Malaris. He's quite a showman, actually, and he's very proud of what he did. And it's an excellent piece of work, but it's an excellent piece of work, actually. I mean, it's very, very high budget. I mean, he has connections with people in cinema, and he used all the techniques, and all the skills and people he could get his hands on to actually help him make this. And he worked really hard to get it right. He wanted to make sure he didn't want to leave any clues. So the guy with the camera is actually wearing one of the hazmat suits as well.
Okay.
Because he thought, well, there's no need for him to, because it's obviously just a film set. But he thought that he could, it's possible that his reflection might be caught somewhere, because there were some reflective surfaces like pieces of glass and the stainless steel of the instruments. You could catch a reflection on that. So he thought, no, let's have the guy with the camera wearing a hazmat suit too. He covered every detail. And that, I think, was not... Having talked to Spiros, I don't think he's some kind of operative. I don't think he's some kind of agent. No. I think he's just a guy who wanted to make a movie, he wanted to have fun, hopefully make a bit of money, selling it and things like that. And but it hit the right note. He inadvertently created something that the people who are actually interested in us found useful. Which is why I think it became so successful, why it became such a sensation. Because now it emerged at just the right time. Because it took me a while to realise this, but soon after the alien autopsy came out, it was May the 5th, 1995, that it emerged. And that's when it was first screened at the cinema in London. And after that, the rest is history. But just a year later, another video came out, showing it was in the interview with an alien. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I think I might do. Yeah, I've seen. If it's the right one we're talking about, probably are. Then I remember seeing like this supposed interview and that.
Yeah. Okay. Now that has never been debunked. Now, as far as the alien autopsy did. Some researchers got on top of it, like Philip Mantle, a couple of other people got on top of it. It didn't take long for the when they were shaking the tree for the fruit to fall. It was pretty. These guys are good. These ufologists, they're good at, they're getting hold of if there's some kind of deceit of uncovering it. And the alien autopsy very quickly revealed its secrets. The alien interview has not. Right. Even though the alien interview is at least as an elaborate production as the alien autopsy. It shows, especially it's in a darkened room, you see like an alien sitting at a table.
Yeah, it is the same one.
There's a spotlight on it.
Yeah, I have seen that.
You see this creature now. Obviously, if that's fake, that's a very, very good piece of work, because you have a puppet. It's moving this time. It's not like the one. It's a mobile puppet, so obviously it has there's either a marionette, strings, or it's a glove puppet. So there'll be someone sitting behind it with his hand, literally inside the creature. Inside, moving it around with his hand, and that's it. Making these things is very, very expensive. Costs a lot of money. Spiros said that the alien that they created cost. He said it was 400,000, and they got a guy called John Humphreys, a sculptor, to make the actual dummy for him. Ironically, when Warner Brothers actually made a dramatisation of the whole thing, they actually got John Humphreys to make their prop for them as well. They didn't know at the time they were hiring the same sculptor.
Okay.
No, but this community, it's quite a tight-knit community, these special effects designers. It's quite a tight-knit community. And it's very unlikely someone could make something like that and create a dummy like you see there. And remain secret, because firstly, it would let it slip. At some point, people would find out. And quite frankly, the guy who made it would want people to find out, because something like that would look good on their CV. You want, if you're going to make something, you don't make something and keep it secret. You make something and you tell people,
Yeah.
so they'll know you made it, and they'll know this is mine.
Yeah.
I mean, and then because you want to be paid for it as well, because obviously you'd have to be paid for it, and whoever produced this would need a lot of money. Nothing's come out of it at all. So there's all kinds of other ways that I believe. I believe that what I'm getting to here, I'm rambling a bit, but what the point I'm making here is I think that alien interview is quite likely to be real. What's more, there's around about the same time. So it's a long story, but it's all going to come. I'll explain I'll make my point here in a moment. But around about the same time, a large number of other videos came to light from what used to be the Soviet Union. Now, the Cold War sort of ended in the late 1980s with Mikhail Gorbachev when he took over control of the Soviet Union. He had, was it Glasnost, Perestroika, openness and restructuring. That basically was his attempt to save the Soviet Union, and it didn't work. And the whole edifice collapsed, as most people said it would. And it became what we have today. We have Russia. There was the Commonwealth of Independent States, which we had Russia and all the former Soviet states, and even some of them are now split up. So we have the Russia we have today. And when that happened, the KGB, the very famous, highly successful intelligence agency of the Soviet Union, that basically shut down, obviously with everything else. And its files, its headquarters was basically left abandoned, including all the secret files, top secret and above, and all various kinds of top secret files were there. This wasn't like the Ministry of Defence files that Nick Pope is waxing lyrical about on Twitter at the moment. This was much more high level than that. And well, basically the people went in and stole them and took them, and they sold them on the black market, which basically means around about during the early to mid 1990s, you could pick up a top secret UFO file from the KGB very, very easily if you had the right price. You could just pick one up. You could get one up. You could get one. And some people did that, including some filmmakers actually did that, and they made a documentary about it. It was very interesting. Roger Moore, the guy who played James Bond, presented it. It was very, very interesting. And one of them shows what looks like a flying saucer crash and an autopsy of some kind of creature. And everything that's wrong with Alien Autopsy is right with this. The film stock is available. The actual original film is there. It's 1960s vintage KGB film stock. It has all the documents that come with it. And because in Alien Autopsy, they never actually revealed. They never allowed anyone to examine the original footage, which they said was shot in 1947. They just showed them copies of it, which obviously is because it's fake. In this case, you see the original film stock. You see there's all kinds of reasons why it's real, because you have like genuine uniforms and genuine clothing and genuine equipment. And no, what I think is that it's possible that the Alien Autopsy became so famous because the people who were behind this truth embargo, this UFO truth embargo, knew all this information was out there, and they couldn't suppress it because it was all on the black market. It all came after the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was no way to control this flow of information. This choke point, this informational choke point, just went out of control completely. And suddenly they realised this UFO secret is basically out there. It's on the market. We can't keep it secret. It's going to come out eventually. They had the alien interview. There was all this Russian stuff. What can they do? If you can't, well, that's to quote Andrew. I don't want to quote Andrew Johnson with his phrase, but basically, if you can't suppress it, you have to confuse it. You have to create confusion. What Andrew calls a muddle up. And that's what the Alien Autopsy did. It was taken. It was Spiros' creation. His hoax grew legs, and it became far more famous than he ever intended. And he's writing a book, actually. The book's going to come out hopefully soon, because I really look forward to reading it. But it became so famous, and it became world famous. It was shown on all the TV networks, and then of course, boom, the rug is pulled out. It wasn't him, but it was Ray Santilli, his former co-creator, who said it's all a load of rubbish. We made it up. It's just fake. And then that was trumpeted from all the rooftops. And so people say, "Oh right, so that was fake." Okay. So we fooled the world. It was one of the world's greatest hoaxes. The new Piltdown Man, they called it. The Piltdown was a fake Stone Age fossil was found once.
Right.
And so then these other videos come out now. You know, the alien interview comes out, all the Russian stuff comes out, and people go, "Oh, there's another fake video." Students make them.
Yeah.
Do you see? So this is what the alien autopsy did. It muddied the water so much that when the real evidence emerged, people weren't interested. They just thought, "Oh, another fake video." That's why they did it. That's why it was done, and it worked perfectly. And just imagine how different it would have been if the alien autopsy never happened. Just imagine how much more attention the alien interview would have got, because the alien interview got a fraction of the publicity that the alien autopsy got, as did the Russian stuff. It hardly ever touched the media. And so that's a good example of what I'm talking about here, with the deception.
They put stuff in films as well, don't they? In science fiction films, they'll put hiding the truth within the film, so you think it's just science fiction films.
Yeah.
So that happens as well, you know. So all different levels until this subversion happens, to suppress the real stuff.
Yeah. That's very interesting, because what you see from Hollywood, some of the fictional movies. I mean, Hollywood produces all kinds of different things. There's no single message from Hollywood. I mean, there's some very, very pro-establishment films. There's some very anti-establishment films that are more anti-establishment than if it was some kind of controlled counterposition. You know, something like Avatar, for example, is not. People have said, "Oh, that's just controlled opposition." No, it's not. I mean, it's far too deep and far too subtle, far too complicated than that. It's a genuine counter-propositional thing. But on the other hand, you get some films in particular will have these things that you talked about. You know, the just a little message. Sometimes it's just like a subliminal. And examples are, for example, in the film The Matrix, there's a very, very short shot of Neo's passport, and it expires on September the 11th. That's one example. There's also it's weird, and that's a film that was made in I believe in 1997. So that's 5 years earlier. And then there was a film. I think it was one of the Batman movies. I can't remember when it was, but it came out just a couple of months before the Sandy Hook massacre, and you just have the word Sandy Hook appears. Now, Sandy Hook is not a usual name. It's not a very common name. It's quite rare. Sandy Hook is. I don't know of anywhere else called Sandy Hook, apart from this school, the alleged school where this alleged shooting happened. I don't know. I've never heard that name ever anywhere else. I don't know. You Google it, and of course all you see is that school. But I mean, even if I Googled it beforehand, I probably wouldn't have seen any other reference to it. So,
in the Batman film, what was Sandy Hook then? Was it a place? Was it?
It appeared on a map. There's a map, and then you just see the name Sandy Hook. Very briefly, I think you actually have to slow the video down to even see it. It's subliminal. But I mean, subliminal stuff. People think, well, no one's going to see that because it's going too fast. But no, you do. Your subconscious sees it. This was proved a long time ago. It was proved scientifically in 1959, and a lot of the psychological think tanks were involved in this, like the Tavistock Institute, the Stanford Research Institute, way back then, when the film Ben-Hur was released. And that's a great movie. I love that film. And the people went along and they were wowed by it because it was really spectacular. Now, when there was an experiment done, because when the reels were sent out to the cinema, half of them had flash frames of Coca-Cola inserted in a few, not in every, because I mean in movies you can't see this, but you get like a frame and you get a blank frame, and you get another one in, and then another one, and then you get, so between each actual frame of the film there's a blank screen, and that is too fast for anyone to see. All you see, because your eye see, is like a moving picture. Now, what happened was, in a few of those frames they actually inserted a picture of a Coke bottle. And they thought that, what's going to happen? Will sales of Coca-Cola be higher in the cinemas with the Coca-Cola bottle in the flash frames? And then there was this control group which didn't have it. And the fact is, they were. Sales of Coke went up. People went during the interval, when people went to the foyer to buy Coke, more people bought Coke. Now you don't see that, you don't know it. It's just, it goes in here now. All goes in here. It comes forward. It filters forward into your conscious mind. Oh, I fancy a Coke. You know, and you don't know where you got that idea from, but you got it. And there's people in high up in power, in positions of power, that employ these psychologists who do things like this to actually to control people's minds, to wield power through psychology. And there's all kinds of ways they do this. All kinds of ways. It's really quite sinister.
And television's full of it, isn't it?
It could be just certain words that were used, certain words that are used by newsreaders at certain times and certain places. George Orwell knew this because in his book 1984, which is a remarkable book. I mean, it inspired me with my books, I think. Because I suppose if George Orwell actually had a bit of inside knowledge, because he was very closely connected to the Fabian Society, which is one of these think tanks, which one of these political think tanks that actually uses these psychologists and thinks to himself, well, how can we take over, basically? We can't do it violently, you can't do it by force.
No.
Right.
Not in a world with nuclear weapons. How do you invade and occupy and take over a country? You have to do it slowly and carefully by getting inside people's heads. Of the population, you control their minds. I mean, you control their mind. You control their minds. You control their culture. You control their society. Orwell knew this. He knew what was happening, and I think he wanted to get the word out.
Yeah.
He wanted to blow the whistle. But what if he could have written a book all about it? Just saying, I am an insider from the Fabian Society, and this is what they've got planned. And then he would be unknown. He would be remembered as this crazy conspiracy theorist who dedicated the last couple of years of his life writing a book about some stupid, nonsensical conspiracy theory. But instead, he wrote 1984, a fictional, and of course that became enormously famous. But he got, in a sense, that distributed the message he wanted distributed in far, far more effective way. He's not remembered as a crazy conspiracy. He wrote this amazing satirical, allegorical piece of literature, which resonates with everybody, with people all over the world.
It's still referred to a lot today, into reference to the world. It is. It was a remarkable piece of work, and he did an enormous service. He did an enormous service to humanity with that book. And it inspired me with my books. Shall I show some?
Yes, please. That'd be lovely.
Well, I'll start. These are my two most recent books, and they're the most relevant.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure.
Okay.
And Roswell Revealed, a world after disclosure.
Okay.
This book is a sequel to the first book.
Right.
And these it's a sequel. Yeah. I'm actually writing another one, so there'll be a trilogy eventually. Maybe sell them as a box set, you know.
And where can they buy? Can they buy these on your website?
Yeah, there's links on my website. They're available on Amazon.
Amazon as well.
And you can order them from bookshops if you want. If you want to just buy them from a bookshop, you can order them. There's a big print version of this coming out, because the print is actually a bit too small. People have complained the print's too small, so I'm bringing out a big print version of this very, very soon. Actually, it should be available within the next few days.
Okay.
But what that book is, I mean, I wanted to tell a story of basically the UFO phenomenon. And that's another thing that's been an enormous interest to me.
Yeah.
UFOs.
Definitely.
Because I mean, the fact of the matter is, we are not alone. We think we are, and indeed, the authorities of this world try to portray us as being alone. They do. They say we're essentially, the Earth is essentially this living planet, which is just this little oasis, really, a little oasis of life. In this, and everything outside is just this infinite cosmic desert and nothing. Vacuum. Carbon compounds, noble gases, hydrogen, fusing hydrogen, and that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
It's dust, it's gas, and there's nothingness, and there's nothing out there. That's how it's portrayed. It's false. It's completely false. We are continuously being interacted with by intelligences, non-human intelligences that don't come from this world. They come from other planets. They possibly come from other dimensions, other times. Whatever they are, they're not us, and they are aware of us, and they're interacting with us. And this is one of the biggest secrets. There's a massive systemic conspiracy to keep this quiet.
Right.
Why is a good question. But if you go back to the dawn of the space age, when now this is basically, there was an article published in 1959, the same year this experiment was done with the film Ben-Hur.
Okay.
And again, this is a psychological think tank at work, and this one's called the Brookings Institute. And it published an article, and I can't remember the very long-winded title, which basically said, they advised NASA, they advised the Russians, the Soviet Space Agency as well, and they basically said, if you, in the course of space exploration, this is right at the beginning, before, after the first couple of rockets had gone up, a dog had been up, no man had gone into space then officially, and he said, if you find evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, even if it's long ago, if it's past evidence of intelligence that no longer exists, it might be an idea not to shout it from the rooftops.
Right.
Because that revelation will have an impact on human culture, on politics, on economics, on the church, which was in the United States, that's a big deal. The church.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we'll leave it up to you, but it's probably not a good idea. Just keep it quiet, you know, just downplay it.
Yeah.
And of course, it looks as if the space agencies actually have taken the advice of the Brookings Institute, because they're, well, firstly, in terms of space exploration, they have found the remains of intelligently built structures on, well, obviously they haven't had a chance to examine the entire solar system, but two planets two objects they've examined in great detail are the Moon and the planet Mars. These two planets, I mean, obviously there's probably more out there on the other, on the moons of the gas giants and things like that, maybe on Venus. We don't know, they haven't gone there yet. But on Mars in particular is extremely interesting. Now there are artificial structures on the Moon, but Mars is far richer, and it began with a face on Mars. Remember the face on Mars? That was discovered by the Viking probe in 1976, and because that's a face. It was, oh no, it just looks like that. I mean, you see a face. Oh, excuse me. No, friends, I'm not.
No, it's okay.
I'm not bored. You see a face, but it's just you know, it's just your imagination. Like you see faces in clouds as well. It's called pareidolia. It's called pareidolia, where your mind looks for these recognisable shapes, even when they're not there. And so people said, okay, but then other researchers had looked closer at that particular photograph, and they realised there were other photographs of parts of the Mars surface nearby. It's a region called Cydonia, and they found pyramids. There was a five-sided pyramid. There was other objects that were clearly artificial. They were too regular. They had very regular configurations, and they looked very much like the ones in Egypt. And in fact, if you compare satellite photos with the pyramids of Giza at Cairo and these particular pyramids on Mars, they look the same. There's the same level of organisation, of artificiality. And so that looks to me like in the distant past there was something built them, something very, very intelligent creature built those. Now Mars, you see, which is interesting, Mars has not always been as it is today, and even official science now says this. They were very, very keen to say that, like, there's signs that there was flowing water on Mars. There's river channels, there's riverbeds. There are the signs of lakes, oceans, and a large ocean that covered the northern part of the planet, which means that it must be very different, because today it's very cold there and it has a very thin atmosphere. But there must have been a time when it had a denser atmosphere and it was an awful lot warmer. And so maybe life evolved there in the distant past, and that it became sophisticated life. Maybe a species evolved that could build something like that, or something visited and built that, or swam outside, maybe both. But then, of course, it all went wrong. Maybe it's because of the big volcanoes that suddenly emerged on Mars. But for whatever reason, it just killed the environment, stone dead, and life died out. And Mars became a dry dust bowl, freezing cold. And then Earth, of course, then evolved. This all happened before life, I think, evolved on Earth. Then life evolved on Earth, and humans emerged, and we start looking at these things and wondering what the hell they are. I mean, technically, you see, it would be possible to send a probe, even without the secret space program, which is a big subject in itself. I think Andrew covers that, doesn't he? But even without the secret space program, you could send it. You could actually clear up this mystery with a mission, and they won't do it. They've sent rovers and things to Mars, but they won't actually send them to this particular region. This area is basically you can't. They've never landed any kind of craft there, so which is a shame. Because that's the first place I'd go if I was designing a Mars mission. That's the first thing I'd look at. This is what everyone they claim to be looking for life. You see, NASA claim, oh, it'd be great if we could discover life out there. You know, I mean, and they sometimes come out with big announcements like, oh, we found ice under the surface, we found water. But then they won't. When these really spectacular things come out, they won't. They just say, oh, no, that's nothing. That's nothing.
That's pretty much what Andrew was saying, wasn't it? You know, it's. And it's true, going to researching that's what. If there's anything interesting, we'll distract you with this little bit of.
Keep you busy.
And then there's possibility they actually, some of the, like with the moon landings that were faked, some of the things on Mars are fake. I mean, Richard D. Hall has done a big study on this, but he believes that some of the footage we see, or some of the photos that we see from Mars are actually taken on Earth, in some remote part of the Earth. He says there's several places that look like that, including there's this place called Devon Island, which is it's a large island off the coast of Canada. It's very big, about the size of England.
Is that the one where there's it looks like a rodent?
Yeah, little lemming.
That's right.
It looks like a little lemming. Devon Island is about the size of England, but it's completely uninhabited. It's far too cold for anyone to live there. But its landscape does look like that. You know, lots of rocks everywhere. So that's a possibility. Now, I mean, the moon landings are interesting because that's what kind of got me into this field. When I found out that there's distinct evidence that the moon landings were faked, and that's a multifaceted subject. But there's the photographs, for example, look like there's artificial lighting. Like you'd find it. Like you find in a studio.
Exactly.
You'd have artificial lights, like like what we've done here. We've put in extra lights so that people can see me. You know. Now, but you see, if you go to a place like the moon, there's only one light source, which is the sun, and they didn't bring any flash bulbs with them or anything like that. They just used the light. They used the sun, and of course, if you do that, I mean, this is going to be a problem if you're taking pictures on the beach. You tend to get like big. Because there's a contrast problem with your photographic, because you need to get the exposure right for either one surface or the other. Now, you need a longer exposure for a dimly lit scene than you would for a brightly lit scene. So you basically have a choice of either having a choice of taking a photo which shows everything in sunlight, but then you just like a silhouette for everything else, or you could just capture what you could in the dark area, and everything would just be whited out, just be this blur of white. And of course, you don't see that with the lunar photos. What you see is something which is much more evenly lit.
Yes, it does.
As if they'd used like reflector boards or flash bulbs or floodlights from the other direction. So that's a problem. Now the skeptics say, "Oh, it's just light reflected off the lunar surface." Well, it doesn't work because the lunar surface has about the same reflectivity. It looks grey, but it's actually black. It has the same reflectivity as tarmac. That's how it. I mean, if it had the kind of reflectivity that the skeptics are saying it has, or in order to do that, then the moon would be, night times on Earth would be almost as bright as the day, because the moon would be reflecting so much light back at us that moonlit nights would be much brighter than they are. The moon actually only reflects 7% of the sun's light. That ratio is called its albedo, and that's its only. Even the areas that, and of course, the areas that what they call the Maria, these plains, these darkened areas on the moon's surface, and they're called Maria, which means seas. People used to think they were seas, but they're not. They're just darkened areas. That's where the Apollo missions landed for most of the time, and so it's even darker there. So that's one reason to suspect that these photos were taken in studio conditions.
It doesn't look like that.
NASA actually NASA did. They just got they basically put a studio together to create these images, and
there's other reasons as well, like the Apollo missions were basically part of the space race. This real this competition with the Soviet Union as their rivals.
Yeah.
And of course, this was very important politically because it was all part of the Cold War.
Exactly, and JFK had laid down into saying they'll reach their moon before the end of the decade. He put that down when
he did.
Yeah,
that's right. It was in. It was actually in May of 1961. He said this, and this was just 6 weeks after the Russians had put Yuri Gagarin up in space. And this put them way ahead. I mean, in the first decade of the space race, it's fair to say that the Soviet Union had a decisive lead. And America struck back. They put their own rockets up there. They broke a couple of endurance records and things like that. And so they gained some ground back during the 1960s. But that's really not very, in terms of publicity, because the space race was essentially, it wasn't just about technology and actual, space exploration. It was about space exploration that has a lot of publicity value. Launching a rocket into space, huge publicity value. Getting a man in space, huge publicity value. But what else is left? Once you've done that, there's not. I mean, America put their own man in space. Yeah, sure, we've done that. We've launched a couple of rockets, but that's not striking back. That's not even in the score. That's what's left after that, and the answer is the moon. There's only one thing you can do, because they both sent probes to the moon. The Russians and the Americans both sent probes to the moon, and the Russians had this little rover, this thing called Lunicod, which is rather like it's a very primitive version of the Discovery rover, which is currently trundling over Mars, or not, as the case may be.
Question.
But then of course it's putting a man on the moon, putting astronauts feet on the moon, and so Kennedy said, "We'll do it before the end of the decade," and they did it with just 5 months to spare, July 1969.
It's almost written like a film, wasn't it? The way it is at the last minute, and the speech, one step for mankind, all this, one step for man, giant leap for mankind. It's almost like it was scripted. Everything was. It's just how Americans do it, don't they? It's very dramatic. It's all.
It is,
it all ties into. They can't help themselves, can
the
they?
Americans are good at this sort of thing. They're good at these very poetic, doing things in a very poetic way. Kennedy's speech, we choose to go to the moon. And he was a great orator, and of course that galvanised the nation, and they thought, we've got to do it now. And they can't fail. It's the only way they can get back in the race. And so they did it with 5 months to spare. Now it's interesting, because we are going through an informational choke point at the moment, because this is the half century we're approaching the 50th anniversary of manned exploration of the moon. And it's actually this year, because Apollo 11 wasn't the first manned mission to the moon. The first manned mission, it was the third. The first manned mission was Apollo 8, which took place in December, over the Christmas period of 1968, 50 years ago, this December coming. And I'm going to be doing a special Panwo radio show about that.
Okay, all right.
So to cover that. There was another one, Apollo 10 as well, went to the moon, and then Apollo 11 was the landing. Apollo 10 released, they actually did test out the lunar module, which was the landing. But it was odd, because that was the only test the lunar module ever had before it was actually sent down onto the moon. Now, the lunar module was an amazing spacecraft that's never been. There was no precedent for this spacecraft, which had a unique design. Firstly, because it had to carry a human down onto the planet, the surface of the moon. That's never been replicated. It's never done before. It's never been done since. And there was no unmanned prelude to that, because the lunar module was amazing. It had two stages. It had a descent stage with a rocket engine, and an ascent stage on top. The sort of round, faceted object on top was actually the cabin where they carried the crew, and it had its own rocket engine, which is how they were going to get back into space. And the rocket engine itself was of a type never tested before, never used before. It had been tested on Earth in the laboratories. They built a mock-up of it, which crashed. It crashed just a couple of weeks before they were going to the moon. It actually crashed, and Neil Armstrong was actually in the passenger seat. Luckily, he managed to get out. He had an ejector seat, and he managed to get out. Wow. And there's footage. You can see the thing crashing to the ground, and Armstrong flies up out of it, and he comes down by parachute safely. Okay. He could have been killed there. That was just a couple of weeks before they were going to do it for real on the moon.
You think if if it actually was going on the moon, you'd think, I'm not doing that.
No, yeah, got my hands on that one.
These things, you're going to put me up on the moon. This, you think? I mean, you think, and I mean, obviously, it's like, that's so they with Apollo 10, they didn't land though with Apollo 10. They just flew over the lunar surface with Apollo 10. But that was literally the only live test that the module had. Yeah,
because I also heard about another guy that was apparently going to be actually working on the moon, apart from Neil Armstrong. He actually died in a freak accident.
Yes,
with his other crew. But he actually called it a lemon. He actually sent it to his boss or something, a lemon, to say that this rocket thing is a lemon. That's how bad he thought it was.
Well, this goes back a bit further, because this goes back to the beginning of the Apollo, when they started designing the moon rocket. It was on Saturn V, and the Saturn V was a huge rocket, which was actually it was designed by the help of a former Nazi called Werner von Braun, who became a household name in the United States. What he did before was he built the V2 rocket, which devastated London in World War II, killed thousands of people. But basically, when he was captured at the end of the war, he could have gone to Nuremberg and faced war crimes trials. But he was basically, was given immunity, and he was taken over to the United States, part of Project Paperclip, and NASA brought him to design these rockets, and the rockets he designed for the space program were basically based on that original design for that missile, a ballistic missile. And what happened in Apollo 1 was the first rocket they built. Was the Apollo 1 mission was going to be the first test of that rocket, the Saturn V rocket. And so they had 3 astronauts. Gus Grissom was the captain, and he was the man that they thought would be the first man on the moon. And this was only, I forgot what year this was, I think it was 65, 66. It was only a couple of years before they were sending people to the moon for real. And he was put in, they were basically, it was just a systems test. They weren't going to launch, they were just doing like a test run, or they were just testing some of the equipment. So they were all in their spacesuits in the cabin, in the command module of the rocket, the part which would go into space. And it was just a routine test, and a fire broke out, and no one knows exactly. Well, there's been several theories about what caused the fire, but unfortunately, the command module has quite a rarefied atmosphere, and has a very high oxygen content. And unfortunately, if a fire breaks out in a high oxygen environment, it just burns like crazy. And so within minutes, the entire interior of the cabin was incinerated, including the 3 astronauts. And Gus Grissom's wife has never believed the official story. It was written off as a freak accident. Although the Apollo 1 capsule was never allowed to be examined independently. There was no independent forensic examination of that capsule. There should have been like a congressional inquiry into that. It was never done. NASA said, we'll handle the whole thing. There was this guy called Thomas Ronald Barron. It was very interesting, this guy, because this was a man who said, basically, it's not safe. That rocket is not safe. No way is that going to get to the moon. It won't even get you up into orbit. You'll be lucky if you eventually be able to do orbital missions with it, but no way is that going near the moon. And around at the same time as the Apollo 1 fire, Thomas Barron was driving home from work one day, and his car broke down. It broke down. It happened to break down while he was crossing a level crossing. And a train crashed into him, killed him. His wife and his child were in there. In fact, in the car too, they were all killed. Just happened to break down on a level crossing.
Amazing.
As David Icke would say, just a coincidence, nothing to worry about.
Yeah, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Move along.
So the whole Apollo thing, ever from the beginning, it stinks of murder and cover-up, and several people died. Like at least there's 4 people we know died in mysterious circumstances related to that project. And then, but just a couple of years later, they fly in rockets to the moon, and you get a guy in 1968. They revolt. They go around the moon. It's a big TV extravaganza, and the astronauts read from the Bible. They read from the Book of Genesis and the story of creation as they were going around the moon, and it was a big emotional moment for everyone. And of course, these things are designed by psychological think tanks as well. And then, of course, just the following year, just a few months later, just 8 months later, you get a landing. And then this was followed by by 6 more successful missions. There was only one major hiccup, only one thing that was Apollo 13.